I went to the post office for one stamp and left in handcuffs. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't threaten anyone, I didn't break a single law, but somehow I was suddenly disorderly and resisting. And that was the day I stopped believing that staying polite is always enough to keep you safe. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, because if you've ever been treated like a problem just for standing your ground, you're going to recognize this feeling real quick. It was a random Tuesday in a small Florida town, the kind of day where the air feels heavy and nothing interesting is supposed to happen. I walked into the post office to mail a letter, grabbed my phone, and started recording. Not in anyone's face, not peeking at private info, just a wide shot of the lobby. I record public spaces sometimes because I've learned something over the years. People behave differently when there's a camera. And when you've been underestimated your whole life, when you've been talked down to dismissed, followed in stores for no reason, you start keeping receipts. You know what I mean? I wasn't there to stir anything up. I was there to buy a stamp. That's it. But about 30 seconds into recording, I hear this sharp voice from behind the counter. "Sir, you can't film in here." I look up, calm as can be, and say, "Actually, I can. It's a public lobby." The supervisor walks over like she's about to shut down a crime scene. She doesn't ask why I'm filming. She doesn't care about the stamp in my hand. She says, "If you don't stop recording, I'm calling the police." And here's the thing. I could have left. I could have said, whatever, and walked out. But I'm tired of shrinking myself just to make someone else comfortable. So I stayed. Two officers walk in like they're responding to an armed robbery, hands near their belts, eyes scanning, energy already tense. One of them says, "Step outside." I ask, for what? He says, "They got a call about me recording." I tell him recording isn't a crime. The other one steps in close and says, "Let me see your ID." That tone. It's not a request, it's a test. I say, "What crime are you investigating?" He doesn't answer that. He just repeats, "Give me your ID." I tell him no, because I don't have to identify myself without reasonable suspicion. And that's when everything changes. The clerk says I'm making people uncomfortable. The officer says this is a federal building. I say policies don't override rights. He asks if I have a weapon. I say no. Someone claims they saw a bulge. Yeah, that happened. Suddenly I've got hands on me, cuffs clicking tight around my wrists. I'm asking, what am I being charged with? He says disorderly conduct and resisting. Resisting what? Standing still, asking questions. The cuffs are digging into my skin, and he leans in and says, "Should have just shown ID." That's when I knew this wasn't about safety. It was about ego. They marched me out in front of everyone like I was a threat, put me in the back of a patrol car, and I remember staring at the metal cage in front of me, thinking all of this over a stamp. It would be funny if it wasn't so insane. That was Act 1, confusion turning into disbelief. Act 2 is where the real story starts. Because once you're in the system, you realize how much it counts on you giving up. Court dates, fees, paperwork, lost hours at work. They make it exhausting on purpose. They assume you'll take a plea just to make it go away. I got home that night with bruised wrists and replayed the footage. And you can see it. The moment they decide I'm going to pay for not cooperating the way they wanted. So I didn't back down. I requested records, filed complaints, called lawyers. One attorney watched the video and said, "They arrested you for being inconvenient." That line stuck with me. And the wild part. As my video started circulating, people reached out with their own stories. A guy said he got charged with disorderly for asking why he was stopped. A woman said her brother was arrested for refusing to ID while walking home. Another man told me a cop publicly called him a predator years after he'd been acquitted. Just slander thrown around like it meant nothing. Patterns started to form. Not every officer, not every department, but enough to see it's bigger than one bad day. When the prosecutor finally reviewed the footage, the tone changed. Weeks later, my lawyer calls and says they're dropping all charges. Dismissed. No plea deal, no probation, just gone. And I remember feeling relief, but also anger, because they can just erase it like it never happened, but I still had to live it. So we didn't stop there. We pushed for policy clarification. We demanded explanations in writing. Eventually, the city agreed to a settlement. Not a jackpot, but enough to sting. The department updated training guidelines about recording in public buildings. One of the officers resigned quietly. No public apology, no headline. Just gone. The other stayed, but with a mark on his record. It wasn't some cinematic courtroom victory. It was more subtle than that. It was accountability in small, undeniable ways. And the best moment, it wasn't the settlement. It wasn't the paperwork clearing my name. It was walking into another post office months later, buying a stamp, holding my phone, and no one said a word. Just a normal transaction like it should have been from the start. That's when I realized the win wasn't about money or pride. It was about not letting someone else rewrite my reality. But here's the twist in the middle of all this. Not everyone can fight back the way I did. Not everyone has the time, the mental energy, the support, or the footage. How many people take a plea just to keep their job? How many people stay quiet because they're scared? And how many times have we watched a viral clip and immediately assumed the person in cuffs must have done something wrong? We're quick to trust authority because it feels safer that way. It's uncomfortable to think mistakes happen, that ego can override judgment, that policies can be misunderstood by the people enforcing them. I'm not anti-police, I'm anti-bad policing. There's a difference. I've met officers who are calm, respectful, and know the law. But I've also seen what happens when authority mixes with insecurity, when someone mistakes compliance for respect, when refusing to surrender your rights becomes a personal insult. The system works best when citizens know their rights and officers respect them. When one side stops caring, the balance breaks. And that's the bigger story here. Not just a stamp, not just a pair of cuffs, but the tension between power and principle. I stood my ground because I believed I was right. Some people say I should have just handed over the ID and avoided the mess. Maybe they're right. Maybe it would have ended in 5 minutes instead of months. But then what? How many small surrenders add up before we don't recognize what's left? That's the part people don't like to talk about. So now I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, would you have complied just to keep the peace? Or would you have taken the risk to stand your ground? Have you ever seen someone treated like a suspect just for asking questions? Drop your thoughts in the comments, not just about me, but about the bigger picture, because conversations like this matter. They're uncomfortable, they're messy, but they're necessary. And if you've got a story like mine, I want to hear it. Share it. Let's talk about it. Hit like, subscribe, and send this to someone who thinks it won't happen to me. Because I used to think that too, until I walked into a post office for a stamp and walked out in handcuffs.